So I want to ask you, you have this powerful poem that begins, I don't care what form you return to me. I just want you back. And you say in one of the lines, to be a watcher is the joyful work of the grieving. And I'm wondering who it is that you're speaking about here and how has being a watcher become joyful work for you?
No, great, wonderful question. My first experience with grief. So when I was in college, I wanted to, like I mentioned, I wanted to drop out of college and go to do comedy in Second City.
Mm-hmm.
And I was about to do that. And I had gotten up the courage to tell my dad I was leaving, dropping out of college. And I was going to go do comedy. And I called him. He worked as a pharmacist. And we had a store that was open in Cheyenne, Wyoming for like 150 years. We opened it during the Wild West before we were even a state here in Wyoming. So it was our family's legacy. And I knew I wanted to not that be my legacy. So I called him and I said, hey, I'm going to go to drop out of college and do comedy, which is what probably every parent is terrified of ever hearing. But I called him, and before I could tell him anything, he asked me to move back home and to finish my studies back home because he had cancer and he was dying. And he asked me to come back home and help take care of my mom. They were older. They had me later in life. And they wanted me to come back home and help run our family store and to be with my mom because it was pretty fatal cancer. And my mom and my dad had been married 45 years at that point, and they had never spent a night apart, ever. And when my dad passed away, I was with him for 9 months during his journey with cancer, and watching my mom grieve for him in such a profound way. It was so hard to watch. The older I've gotten, I find grief proof that we matter to one another. I find grief to be the quintessential human experience of all time. It means that we got our roots tangled with each other. It means that we loved each other so fearlessly and so recklessly that we took this risk to have our hearts someday shattered when someone else slips across the veil. And so I watched my mom and my dad passed away. It was a long suffering cancer. And then when my dad passed away, my mom experienced grief in such a hard, she lived another 10 years, and it was 10 years of really dark grief, of this grief of just regret, of just guilt. And she didn't do anything, like all the unspoken words that we all have that we don't say enough to one another. All the times we should say we love each other over and over. They probably said I love each other 3 million times, but she wanted another one. And she was only focusing on that she wasn't remembering the smell of, like, I would go outside in our garden and green beans would come up in the air. My dad was a master gardener. She couldn't be around green beans anymore because it would break her heart, the smell of green beans. And for me, it tied to my soul, and it made me connect with, my dad is here in this sense. And so when I wrote these poems, I wish I could have written these at a time that I could have read these poems to my mom to say there was another. Grief is certainly heartbreaking. It's certainly, it's like a comet that hits our planet. It terraforms everything. I write about it in the book. There is the idea that grief is like a wildfire that destroys a beautiful redwood forest or forest. It comes in, it destroys it all. But oftentimes after those fires, something called a super bloom happens, where wildflowers start growing up from the ashes. It's maybe not the forest that it was before, but there's still life. There's still beauty. It's just in a different form. And so that is why I wrote these poems. I wanted to have these in a way, and I read them aloud. And I think that my mom is sitting here and my dad together as I read these poems out loud. I imagine that maybe I could have helped them in their time of my mom's time of grief, that she could have navigated it. And that I experienced in such a profound way in that moment. And then through obviously friends and family, COVID. I don't think many of us escaped COVID without losing somebody we loved. Grief is the ultimate unifier. I mean, we all might disagree on religion or politics or spirituality or all the million things, the blue dress or the gold dress, whatever it is we're asked to disagree with each other about. Grief is the common uniter. We all know what it's like to grieve. Someone who might hate me and think I'm their enemy, I would sit with them and say, yes, but we know what it's like to lose somebody we love.
Mm-hmm.
We know what it's like to have that empty chair. We know what it's like to have our heart broken in this profound way. Let's build a bridge from there. We know what it's like to lose somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought these poems of grief were the quintessential human experience that all of us feel at the same time.
How about we have you share one of those poems from Upon Departure?
I would be honored to. Would you like it to be the one you referred to, or would you like it to be another one? I am okay with whatever.
Oh, I want it to be the one that's calling to you right now. Which one does Mama need to hear right now?
Oh, that is okay. Then yes, that's the perfect one. This is definitely one. If I could have sat with her, if I could have gone back in time and brought this poem to her while she was sitting in this same chair in this house after my dad passed, and holding, she would hold his scarf in her hands constantly, and she would hold on to this poem. And I wish I could go back in time and read this poem to her, because she was she thought grief was a form of weakness. She didn't want people to see her grieve. And I wish I could have gone back and tell her that no, this extolling of grief, the showing of grief, is a sign of courage. It's a sign, it's proof that you gave your heart to another person. And how amazing is that we have the miracle of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This poem is Upon Departure. It's number 35 in Departure. And here it goes. When somebody else tries to tell you how you should grieve, smile and forgive them through your watering eyes. And then imagine how lonely it must be to be the person who audits the teardrops of other people. The well-intended will tell you how long you should miss your beloved, but you take your time. Grief is a hedge maze, and being lost inside of it is more than okay. Don't race through your heartache, because you might miss a miracle or two in the teardrops rolling down your face. And don't grieve quickly just to make somebody else feel better. If you need to, let your grief become a coral reef. Let the algae of your hurt slowly form over the years into the softest violet hue of heaven. It can take 2 lifetimes to recover when our beloved becomes an empty chair, but it's okay. Take as much time as you need. Your healing is your healing. And the scars of absence will itch longer than you can possibly ever imagine. But that's because you risked to love so deeply. And that's so much better than the alternative, isn't it? I'm so proud of you, Mom, and the courage it takes for you to grieve so fearlessly. Don't listen to those who want you to go back to normal. Normal will never exist again for those of us who have had part of our heart broken. If the moon snapped in half, would it feel normal? To hell with normal. Normal was their scent on your collar. Normal was their voice resting in your ears. Normal was their touch on your skin. You have a new normal now. It's looking for the shape of clouds, for messages from the great beyond that tell you that your beloved is fine. You have a new normal now. It's building a cabin in the woods of your memory where you and your beloved can meet for lunch. You have a new normal now. It's crying and laughing at the same time whenever their favorite song plays on the radio. Grief isn't the enemy of life. Numbness is. Don't become numb to your grief. Welcome it in and let it wrap you up like a blanket whenever it shows up at your door. It's okay to let it in. Don't fight your grief. It's okay. Your beloved misses you just as much as you miss them. And someday, I swear the 2 of you are going to get tangled up all over again. And someday, the 2 of you are going to push each other under a shower of falling celestial blooms. And someday, the 2 of you are going to ride comets again, out there on the edge of everything. And someday, the 2 of you will giggle about all the times someone else tried to tell you how you should grieve.
Oh my gosh. I am weeping.